ever feel like, I don't know, like someone's kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes?
Yeah, yeah.
Like the world's gone a little haywire and nobody really knows the playbook.
Right.
Well, today we are taking a deep dive into a theory
Okay.
that might just make you think twice about, the news you read and even the values you hold dear. It's this idea called subversion.
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, it's not your typical spy movie stuff.
Oh, no. It's much deeper than that.
Yeah.
You know, imagine like a slow, almost invisible shift
Hmm.
in a society's like core, its beliefs, its culture, its
Yeah.
very identity. And it's all orchestrated from within.
It's kind of like, if you think about it, like cultural judo, like using your opponent's strength against them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So our guide through this fascinating and, some might even say unnerving world is Yuri Bezmenov,
Okay.
who was a Soviet journalist who defected to the West back in the 70s.
Interesting.
Now, full disclosure, we're not presenting this as like the gospel truth or anything.
Right.
But as one man's incredibly interesting, and some might say controversial, take
Yeah.
on how societies can be manipulated over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're kind of treating this like a fascinating intellectual puzzle,
Yeah,
like unpacking his claims, seeing what we can learn from them,
exactly.
even decades later.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Yeah.
Bezmenov's big argument is that subversion, it's not about brute force.
Right.
It's about fundamentally changing how people see the world.
Mm.
I mean, think about it. Why bother, invading a country outright when you can just make them tear themselves apart from the inside?
Right, right. He uses this analogy of judo, which I think is really, really brilliant,
Yeah.
where a skilled practitioner can redirect their opponent's force
Yeah.
using their own momentum against them.
Right.
And subversion, according to Bezmenov, is very similar. It's about identifying and exploiting existing vulnerabilities within a society
Yeah.
and widening those cracks until the whole structure weakens,
Yeah.
from within.
So why was America, in Bezmenov's crosshairs? He seemed so convinced that the U.S. was like a prime target for this kind of manipulation.
Yeah.
Particularly because of its openness, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
He even contrasted it with Japan, which at the time was much more closed off to outside influence.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Bezmenov argued that these very freedoms, the ones that we hold so dear,
Right.
could also be exploited, used to plant ideas, sow discord.
Yeah.
It's almost like, think about it like a virus. A closed system is harder to penetrate,
Right.
but an open one, well, that's where things get a little more vulnerable.
So America was the target, but what was the plan?
Right.
This is where I think Bezmenov gets even more intriguing.
Yeah.
He lays out this subversion playbook, this step-by-step guide to
Right.
reshape a society, but without firing a single shot.
Yeah, and it's not, it's not a quick process either. Bezmenov talks about like a gradual transformation, one that could take a generation or more.
No.
He breaks it down into 4 distinct stages:
Okay.
demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization.
Okay, let's unpack these stages. What exactly did he even mean by demoralization?
Yeah.
How do you even begin to demoralize an entire nation?
Right. So think of it like this. Imagine like slowly chipping away at a society's core values,
Okay.
like its sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
Bezmenov argued that this could take, 15, even 20 years. You just slowly shift attitudes and beliefs, particularly among young people.
So is this like some kind of mass brainwashing campaign?
Right.
It sounds like we're talking about a dystopian novel or something.
Well, it's more subtle than that.
Okay.
Bezmenov pointed to several key areas where this chipping away might occur.
Yeah.
Religion, education, social life, power structures, even law enforcement.
Okay, so give me an example. How would this demoralization play out in, say, religion?
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about
Well, Bezmenov suggested that instead of like outright suppression, there'd be a gradual shift away from traditional faiths.
Okay.
He pointed to things like the rise of, New Age spirituality cults back in the 70s
Right.
as examples of how people's faith might be challenged,
Yeah.
creating a sort of spiritual void that could then be, easily filled.
So it's not about necessarily making people atheists,
Right.
but more about fragmenting and weakening those existing belief systems.
Exactly, yeah.
It's fascinating and a little creepy
Yeah.
how much thought he put into this.
It is. It's all about that slow and steady erosion of of shared values.
Yeah.
He saw a similar pattern in education as well,
Okay.
where the focus might shift away from, practical skills, rigorous academics,
Yeah.
towards more subjective, less grounded subjects.
And what about like social life? How does that fit into this whole demoralization thing?
So Bezmenov believed that, strong communities
Right.
where people, trust and rely on each other, they act as a kind of societal glue.
Right.
He argued that subversion would aim to weaken those bonds, making people more isolated, more dependent on, external authorities, like
Yeah.
less trusting of their neighbors.
Right. It's like that old, divide and conquer. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
It's a classic strategy,
Yeah.
but applied at such a massive scale.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he also had some pretty strong opinions too
Yeah.
about the media and power structures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bezmenov believed that control over information
Right.
and the narratives surrounding those in power, that was crucial.
Yeah.
He suggested that unelected groups or individuals, gaining undue influence,
Yeah.
that could erode trust in traditional institutions,
Right.
which further feeds that sense of demoralization.
Yeah. And it's not hard to see too how he might draw some parallels to like things that are happening today.
Right,
The
yeah.
rise of social media,
Sure.
the 24/7 news cycle,
Yeah.
the increasing distrust in institutions.
Mhm.
It's almost like looking in a funhouse mirror in a way,
Yeah.
You see these echoes of his theories
Right.
in our modern world.
And that's what makes his ideas so compelling.
Yeah.
Even if we don't necessarily agree with everything he said,
Right.
it makes you stop and think, wait a minute, what if he's onto something
Yeah,
here?
yeah. Okay, so let's say this demoralization phase is successful.
Okay.
What happens next?
Right.
Because this is where things start to get really unstable, right? So we've got the society and it's teetering on the edge. Like its values are fractured, its people are divided.
Yeah.
This is where Bezmenov says things really start to kick into high gear. Right?
Exactly. This is the destabilization phase
Yeah.
where those cracks that we talked about, they become gaping fissures. And remember how Bezmenov said that subversion is like judo?
Yeah.
This is where the opponent starts to really lose their balance.
So how does this destabilization actually manifest? What does it actually look like, on the ground?
Well, so Bezmenov highlighted a few key indicators.
Okay.
One was this rise of radical groups
Right.
pushing extreme ideologies, and they're really trying to exploit those existing divisions.
Yeah.
Think back to the 70s, right? The rise of militant groups,
Yeah.
both on the left and the right.
Right, right.
The escalation of social unrest.
It's like that old saying, never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Like these groups, they thrive on chaos.
Precisely. And this chaos, feeds into another aspect of destabilization,
Okay.
which is this breakdown of law and order.
Right.
So, people become more fearful, less trusting of institutions,
Yeah.
and therefore more likely to take matters into their own hands.
And this leads to the crisis stage.
Exactly. This is the point of no return,
Right.
where society's in free fall.
Right.
And Bezmenov believed that a nation in this state, desperate for stability and security,
Right.
would be vulnerable to two possible outcomes.
Okay, hit me with them.
All right. So the first, and perhaps the most dramatic, is a full-blown civil war.
Yeah.
You've got different factions all vying for control,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
further tearing the country apart.
Yeah.
The second, perhaps more insidious outcome is a quiet takeover, either from within or by a foreign power,
Right.
basically capitalizing on the chaos that they helped create.
So either way, not a great place to be. But let's say, for argument's sake, a society manages to navigate this crisis.
Okay.
What then? I mean, this is where Bezmenov gets really chilling, I think. When
Yeah.
he starts talking about this phase, he calls it normalization.
It's almost Orwellian, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is where that new order takes hold,
Mhm.
consolidating its power, and often, eliminating those who were initially sympathetic to their movement.
Wow.
The irony, of course, is that the very people who helped usher in this new era, they become its first victims.
It's a pretty bleak picture, I gotta say, that he paints. I mean, whether you buy into Bezmenov's theories completely or not, you have
Yeah.
to admit it makes you think.
Yeah.
But if we're gonna follow his playbook, to the end here,
Sure.
like, what did he suggest as a counter to all of this?
Right.
How do we fight back against something as pervasive and insidious, really, as subversion?
Well, his solution might surprise you.
Okay.
It wasn't about building bigger walls or investing in more weapons.
Okay.
In fact, Bezmenov believed the answer was far more personal.
Okay.
He called it self-restraint.
Self-restraint.
Yeah.
That's not what I was expecting. What did he even mean by that?
So he argued that true freedom, it wasn't about limitless indulgence or the constant pursuit of more.
Yeah.
It it was about this willingness to set boundaries,
Okay.
both for ourselves and for society as a whole.
Yeah.
He saw excess, whether it was rampant consumerism or the erosion of traditional values,
Yeah.
as playing right into the hands of those seeking to destabilize a nation.
So it's about like finding that balance,
Yes.
that sweet spot between individual liberty
Yeah.
and the common good.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And this is where I think things get really, really interesting. Bezmenov, a man who'd experienced the suffocating control of the Soviet system,
Right.
argued that one of the strongest bulwarks against subversion was something deeply personal:
What's that?
faith.
Now that is surprising, especially coming from a former Soviet. Why faith?
Well, Bezmenov believed that a strong moral compass, which he saw as often rooted in religious faith, acted as a kind of, societal immune system,
Right.
making individuals less susceptible to manipulation and more resilient in the face of, fear and uncertainty.
So it's not about necessarily pushing any one religion, but rather about kind of fostering a culture where
Yes.
faith in all its forms is
Yes.
valued and respected.
Precisely.
Oh.
And I think that's a really powerful message.
Yeah.
Even if you don't subscribe to any particular religion yourself.
Yes.
It's about recognizing that a society that's devoid of faith,
Yeah.
of something, larger than oneself,
Yeah.
that can become easy prey for those seeking to exploit our doubts and insecurities.
Yeah. It's a lot to unpack, this idea. Whether you agree with Bezmenov or not, his ideas are a potent reminder that I think that the battle for hearts and minds,
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't always fought with bombs and bullets.
Right.
Sometimes the most powerful weapons are the ideas we embrace,
Yeah.
the values that we hold dear,
Absolutely.
and the communities that we build.
I think that's a great point. I really do. And perhaps that's the most enduring takeaway from Bezmenov's lectures. The best defense against subversion, it isn't necessarily about building stronger walls, but it's about cultivating inner strength. It's about fostering genuine connections and holding on to that essential belief in something greater than ourselves.
So the next time you feel like the world's going a bit haywire,
Yeah.
remember Yuri Bezmenov's warning. Question the narratives that you're being fed.
Mhm.
Strengthen the bonds with your community.
Absolutely.
And above all, hold on to those values that make you you, because in the end, that might just be the most powerful act of subversion of all.